In this video, I'm going to talk about understanding the battlefield. And when I say that, I mean the battlefield is the mind. Like if you were a general and you were going to go into battle, you were going into a wartime effort, one of the first things you would do is try to understand the nature of the battlefield, because many wars have been won or lost because somebody didn't understand the field of battle they were going to be fighting in. So I want to show just a model of how our brain works. And this is something that God has given us, right? God has given us a mind, a brain that is connected to the rest of our body. The mind is, I think, more than the brain, but the mind is something that God has given us. We have a mind that we can use, and it can be used to keep God's commandments, or it can be used for sin, right? And it can be used for good, it can be used for evil. And if you're like me, you've probably had things at times in your life that you said you weren't going to do again, or something you said you were going to do even though you hadn't done it before. And then came what I call a critical moment. Critical moments are these times where we can choose a course of behavior. And then you realize later, you look back and you're like, why didn't I do what I thought I was going to do? Or why didn't I do what I had planned to do? And the reason I think in large part that happens is because we lose part of our mind. So yes, you are losing your mind. If you take your hand and you make a fist, this is a kind of a representation of our brain. Here, the wrist, my wrist would be my brainstem. That's just basic life function. It makes things like your heartbeat or your lungs, your diaphragm to move so your lungs breathe. It keeps things, it just tends to be rhythmic in what it does. It's very basic life function. You get an injury to your brainstem, you can't survive. Now, moving further, and we're going to leave that part alone. We don't really have any control over the brainstem. But what we also have the thumb in our model here. The thumb is inside here. That's what we would call the limbic system. You'll hear me talk about that many times in these videos. The limbic system. The limbic system has two parts. It has an area that activates fear so that we can avoid things that have been painful in the past. And it has a part that causes us to pursue. It rewards us for pursuing things that are generally good for us, right? Connection, novelty, food, certain types of food, sex, basic drives, and there's things that are good. There's a longer list than that, but you get the idea. We get a reward. There's a chemical reward. We get something called dopamine and also endogenous opioids. So dopamine gives us pleasure. Endogenous opioids, you may have already guessed, numbs our pain. So we are wired by God to seek certain behaviors. The problem is we live in a world that's perverted the things that we can receive in that. And so we are rewarded for seeking connection or sexual stimulation, and there are things in areas such as pornography that we have kind of hijacked that. And I'll talk about it in detail in another video, but basically these things actually are what we call a super stimulus. So they overload the reward pathway. And then what normal things, the normal things that should fire that pathway don't give us the same kind of reward. The other part's really important too. It's called the amygdala. It's the fear activator. And so when something has been painful in the past, it locks onto that. What's important to understand is this limbic system is a survival system. It's it's emotional. It has sensory inputs. What you see, you hear, you smell, you taste, you feel with your body, internal sensations. All those things come into that limbic system, and in a very quick reaction, it gets the body ready for survival behaviors like fight flight. You may have heard of the fight flight response. It gets us it might even go to something called freeze, where all your muscles tense up, or in extreme cases it can even cause us to faint and lose all muscle tone whatsoever. There's no thinking at this level. Thinking is actually this part here, the frontal lobe, specifically something called the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex resists this from taking over. It develops later, and I'm not going to get in all the details in this video, but we will in other videos. But it's important to understand that the limbic system there's no thinking at this level. It's simply a reinforcement area. So it's conditioned behavior, stimulus, response. So there's a certain stimulus generates a physical and emotional response without us ever thinking about it. The prefrontal cortex is important for us because it allows us to say, wait a minute, maybe I don't want to do that this time. It allows us to have choice. It's important that we understand that the limbic system is only concerned with immediate reinforcement. It doesn't care about long-term consequences. It doesn't even understand that time passes. It is part of our God-given guidance system, but it can be miscalibrated when we're wounded by life events, or maybe we don't get some need met. I'm going to talk about that in further detail at another video, but just understand right now that sensory inputs, things that we sense, right, that we see, hear, smell, taste, feel internally, can trigger a response from our limbic system that can actually shut off our prefrontal cortex. What does that mean? I may have been thinking something, and then when I was practicing, or I was thinking about what I was going to do in a certain situation, maybe I was going to say no to pornography. Something happens and that limbic system takes over. We don't have the ability to think. We lose our ability to think, and we become very instinct driven, and we really lose the ability to choose. I want to give somebody some comfort in that, understanding that. You and others around you may be really frustrated that you keep failing to follow through on what you said you were going to do or weren't going to do. It's probably because you get to a place where your limbic system takes over. Now, don't use this as an excuse to keep doing the wrong things. At this point, one of the things you can do is figure out where you need to set boundaries. But that's not a good long-term plan, because I've never built a fence I couldn't climb. Okay? So you build boundaries to avoid getting to the place where your limbic system takes over. And we're going to talk in other videos about things you can do to help improve, actually to stay here, so you can remain conscious and follow through and have self-control. We're going to learn how to develop self-control. God bless you. We'll see you in the next video.